The heavens broke that spring day in 1873, unleashing a fury unlike anything Glory Marshall had ever witnessed in her 22 years of life. The river that had once flowed peacefully behind her family's homestead now roared with unholy vengeance, swallowing everything in its path, including her family, her home, and her unwavering faith in God's mercy. Glory stood atop the muddy rise, her sodden dress clinging to her trembling body as she surveyed what remained of the only world she'd ever known. Nothing. Not the little white farmhouse her father had built with his own hands. Not the barn where she'd spent countless hours helping her mother with the chickens and goats. Not her younger brothers who had been playing by the river's edge when the wall of water came crashing down the valley without warning. The torrential spring rains that had pounded the Texas countryside for weeks had finally conspired to unleash this catastrophe. Glory had been returning from the Wilkins place, where she delivered some of her mother's fresh baked bread, when she heard the terrible roar. She'd run toward home, her heart pounding in her chest, only to witness the floodwaters devour everything she loved in one merciless gulp. 3 days she'd searched. 3 days of clawing through mud and debris. 3 days of calling names that would never again answer. And when she'd finally found what remained of her family, her father's lifeless body wedged beneath a fallen oak, her mother and brothers never recovered at all. Something broke inside her that no human hands could mend. Why? She had screamed at the indifferent sky. Why take them? Why spare me? Her voice had echoed across the devastated valley, but no divine answer came. Just silence and the occasional mocking birdsong, as though nature itself had already forgotten its terrible crime. Now, a week later, Glory stood on that same rise, her possessions reduced to the clothes on her back, a locket containing a snippet of her mother's hair, and her father's pocket watch that had somehow stopped precisely at the moment the flood had struck. She had nothing else. Nothing except the gnawing emptiness where her faith had once resided. The sound of approaching hoofbeats stirred her from her desolation. Glory turned, instinctively wary of strangers. The countryside had grown lawless in recent years, with desperate men taking advantage of isolated homesteads. But the rider approaching her now didn't have the look of an outlaw. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders straight beneath a dust-covered denim shirt. A well-worn Stetson shaded eyes that assessed the devastation with a practiced gaze before settling on her solitary figure. He guided his chestnut stallion expertly through the debris-strewn ground, coming to a stop several paces from where she stood. "Miss." His voice carried the soft drawl of someone born to these parts. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Glory straightened her spine, summoning what little dignity she could muster. "I have nowhere else to be." The stranger's gaze swept over her, taking in her mud-stained dress and the hollow look in her eyes. Understanding dawned on his weathered face. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "Name's Vince Quinn," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of summer wheat. "Most folks call me Vince. I ride for the Box M Ranch about 15 miles west of here." He gestured at the devastation around them. "I've been checking the valley for survivors." "There aren't any," Glory replied flatly. "Not here." The cowboy Vince studied her for a long moment. "Except you." Glory looked away. "Except me. You got people you can go to, family somewhere." She shook her head, her throat constricting. "No," Vince replaced his hat, his expression thoughtful. "The ranch where I work. The owner's wife is looking for help with the house and cooking. It's honest work with a roof over your head and regular meals." He paused, watching her carefully. "You'd be safe there." Glory wanted to laugh at the word safe. What did safety mean in a world where everything you loved could be ripped away in an instant? But she had no choices left, no path forward but the one being offered. "I don't need charity," she said stiffly. "It's not charity. It's a job offer." His blue eyes held no pity, just steady resolve. "And you look like someone who knows how to work." Glory glanced down at her calloused hands. She'd been working since she could walk, cooking, cleaning, mending, farming. Work was all she had left. "I'll need to bury my father properly before I go anywhere," Vince nodded solemnly. "I'll help you." They worked in silence, digging a grave on the highest ground they could find where the floodwaters hadn't reached. Glory fashioned a crude cross from broken fence planks. She didn't pray as they lowered her father's body into the ground. The words wouldn't come, and she wasn't sure anyone was listening anyway. Vince removed his hat during the burial, his head bowed respectfully. When it was done, he offered her his canteen and a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Glory couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of grief and exhaustion. She accepted the food with trembling hands. As she ate, Vince told her about the Boxem Ranch. It was owned by a man named Maxwell and his wife, good people who treated their workers fairly. They ran cattle primarily, but also kept horses, some of the finest in the territory. The ranch had weathered the flood better than the valley farms, situated as it was on higher ground. Mrs. Maxwell is expecting their first child, Vince explained. She needs help with the household more than ever. When Glory had finished eating, Vince offered her his hand. "We should get going if we want to make it before dark." She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses but warm and steady. He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. Glory sat stiffly, unaccustomed to such proximity with a man who wasn't her father or brothers. "I won't let you fall," Vince said quietly, sensing her discomfort. As they rode away from the ruins of her former life, Glory didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The flood had taken everything, including the faith she'd once held so dear. God had abandoned her family to the waters. She would not waste another prayer on a deity who turned a deaf ear to desperate pleas. Vince guided the horse carefully through the debris-littered countryside. Occasionally, they passed other signs of the flood's destruction: uprooted trees, drowned livestock, the remnants of other homes. Each sight drove the nail of loss deeper into Glory's heart. "The whole valley got hit hard," Vince commented. "Never seen a flood like this one." "God's judgment, some would say," Glory replied bitterly. Vince was quiet for a moment. "I don't believe that." "What do you believe, Mr. Quinn?" "I believe sometimes rivers flood, rain falls, nature takes its course." His voice was thoughtful. "Doesn't mean there's no higher purpose to it all." Glory stiffened. What purpose could there possibly be in drowning innocent children? Vince had no answer for that, and they continued in silence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. After about an hour of riding, the landscape began to change. The devastation grew less pronounced as they moved to higher ground. Eventually, they crested a rise, and Vince pulled his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Boxem Ranch." Glory followed his gesture and saw a sprawling property nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills. A large main house stood proudly at its center, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and smoke curled invitingly from the main house's chimney. "It's bigger than I expected," Glory murmured. "Maxwell started with nothing 20 years ago," Vince replied. "Built it all from the ground up." As they approached, Glory could see activity around the ranch: cowboys tending to horses, a woman hanging laundry, a man repairing a wagon wheel. It was a working ranch, humming with purpose, and despite her grief, Glory felt a flicker of something like hope. Not for faith restored that was gone forever, but for the simple possibility of survival. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair emerged from the barn as they rode into the yard. His weathered face broke into a smile when he spotted Vince. "Quinn, wondered when you'd be back." His smile faltered when he noticed Glory. "You found a survivor." Vince dismounted first, then helped Glory down from the horse. Her legs trembled beneath her after the long ride. "Boss, this is Miss Glory Marshall. Her family's place was down in the valley. She's the only one left." Vince's voice was respectful but matter-of-fact. "I told her Mrs. Maxwell is looking for household help." Mr. Maxwell studied Glory with kind but assessing eyes. "My wife will be pleased. She's been overwhelmed with the household duties since—" He stopped abruptly, seemingly remembering Glory's situation. "Well, you're welcome here, Miss Marshall. Vince wouldn't have brought you if he didn't think you were honest and hardworking." Glory nodded stiffly. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." Call me Robert. Everyone except the hands does." He gestured toward the main house. "Come along, let's introduce you to my wife." As they walked toward the house, Glory became painfully aware of her bedraggled appearance. Her dress was stained with mud and worse, her hair a tangled mess, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She must look like some wild creature dragged in from the wilderness. Vince seemed to read her thoughts. "Mrs. Maxwell will understand," he said quietly. "She's a kind woman." The main house was spacious and well-built, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, it was furnished simply but comfortably, polished wood floors covered with woven rugs, sturdy furniture that spoke of quality without ostentation, and here and there, touches that revealed a woman's presence. Embroidered pillows, a vase of wildflowers, curtains that softened the afternoon light. A pretty woman with auburn hair piled atop her head emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen. Her pregnancy was evident beneath her apron, though she moved with grace despite it. "Robert, who's this?" Her gaze was curious rather than suspicious as it settled on Glory. "Clara, this is Miss Glory Marshall. Vince found her down in the valley. She's lost everything in the flood and she needs work. I remembered you saying just yesterday how you could use help around the house." Clara Maxwell's expression softened with compassion. She approached Glory and without hesitation took her hands. "Oh, you poor dear, you must be exhausted and heartsick." The kindness in her voice nearly broke Glory's composure. She had been holding herself together with sheer willpower, but genuine compassion threatened to unravel her carefully constructed defenses. "I can work," Glory managed to say. "I'm good with cooking and cleaning. I can sow and tend to gardens. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I can see that," Clara replied gently. "But right now, what you need is a hot bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal. The rest can wait until tomorrow." Glory wanted to protest that she didn't need special treatment, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. The events of the past week, the grief, the hunger, and the long ride had all conspired to drain her last reserves of strength. "Thank you," she whispered. Clara turned to Vince, who had been standing quietly in the doorway. "Thank you for bringing her to us, Vincent. You did the right thing." Vince nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Glory's. "Just doing what needed doing, madam." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll leave Miss Marshall in your capable hands. Got to see to my horse." After he departed, Clara led Glory to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. "This will be yours," she explained. "It's not much, but it's private." The room contained a narrow bed with a quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand with a mirror. A window overlooked the backyard, and beyond it, the rolling hills. "I'll have hot water brought up for a bath," Clara continued. "And find you some clean clothes. They'll be a bit big, I'm afraid, but we can take them in." Left alone, Glory sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of a clean room and the promise of a bath. She hadn't allowed herself to think beyond survival for days. Now, in this moment of relative safety, the full weight of her loss threatened to crush her. She pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle the sob that rose unbidden from her chest. She wouldn't break down, not now, not when these people had shown her kindness. She would be strong, work hard, and somehow find a way to live in this new, faithless world. The bath, when it came, was nothing short of miraculous. The two ranch hands who carried up the copper tub and buckets of steaming water were respectful and quick. Clara provided soap that smelled of lavender, clean towels, and a nightgown along with a simple dress for the next day. "Take your time," she said kindly. "Dinner won't be for another hour. Rest if you need to." Alone again, Glory sank into the hot water, watching as the dirt and grime from her ordeal swirled away. If only grief could be washed away so easily. She scrubbed every inch of her skin until it was pink, washed her hair twice, and still didn't feel clean. The memories clung to her like the mud had thick and suffocating. After drying off and changing into the borrowed nightgown, Glory sat on the edge of the bed, combing through her damp hair. The simple act, so normal and yet so far removed from the horror of recent days, brought a fresh wave of grief. How many times had her mother done this very thing, sitting by the fire in their now vanished home? Gentle knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Miss Marshall." Dinner's ready if you feel up to joining us, Clara called softly. Glory took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She had accepted their charity. Now she would repay it with whatever strength she had left. "I'll be right there," she replied, quickly braiding her hair and changing into the dress Clara had provided. It was indeed too large, but clean and whole, which was more than could be said for her own ruined garments. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Besides Robert and Clara Maxwell, Vince Quinn was also present, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. Glory noticed he'd trimmed his beard as well. "I asked Vince to join us," Clara explained as they seated themselves at the table. "He can tell us more about the situation in the valley." Robert Maxwell bowed his head. "Let us pray and give thanks." Glory stiffened but lowered her head out of respect for her hosts. As Robert thanked God for the food, for bringing Glory safely to them, and for his continued blessings, she felt a familiar bitterness rise in her throat. What God would allow such devastation and then expect thanks? She was aware of Vince's gaze on her, observant and somehow understanding, as if he sensed her internal struggle. When the prayer ended, he was the first to speak, directing the conversation away from her. "The valley's a mess, boss," he reported. "Water's receding, but it'll be months before any of that land is workable again. Lots of livestock lost, few buildings left standing." Robert nodded grimly. "Any idea how many people?" "Can't say for certain. Some got out in time, others." He glanced at Glory apologetically. "It's all right," she said quietly. "I know I'm not the only one who lost family." Clara reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're very brave, Glory." Glory shook her head. "Not brave, just still here." "Sometimes that's the bravest thing of all," Vince remarked, his voice low. The conversation shifted to ranch matters after that, for which Glory was grateful. She ate mechanically, the food tasteless despite its quality. Her body needed nourishment, even if her spirit felt beyond repair. After dinner, Glory insisted on helping Clara with the dishes despite the older woman's protests. "Please," she said, "I need to be useful." Clara relented, and they worked side by side, washing and drying in companionable silence. Through the kitchen window, Glory could see Vince and Robert on the porch, smoking pipes and talking in low voices. "He's a good man," Clara commented, following Glory's gaze. "Vincent Quinn. Been with us 5 years now. Robert trusts him more than any other hand on the ranch." Glory nodded noncommittally. She had no interest in men, good or otherwise. Her only concern was survival. "He lost people too," Clara continued softly. "His wife and infant daughter 3 years back, influenza." Glory looked at her in surprise. "He's a widower." "Yes, hit him hard. He doesn't talk about it much, but I've seen him sometimes, looking at their picture. He keeps it in his vest pocket, right over his heart." Glory felt an unwelcome pang of connection to the quiet cowboy. Loss was loss after all, no matter how it came. "Get some rest," Clara advised as they finished the dishes. "Tomorrow we can talk about your duties and get you properly settled." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in a week, Glory stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and listened to the strange sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak of the house settling. She thought of her family, of the home that no longer existed, of the God she had trusted all her life, who had proven untrustworthy in her hour of greatest need. Sleep came eventually, but it was haunted by nightmares of rushing water and the screams of those she couldn't save. Dawn broke clear and bright, a mockery of the darkness in Glory's heart. She rose early, dressed in the 2 large borrowed clothing, and made her way to the kitchen. To her surprise, Vince was already there, building up the fire in the cookstove. He straightened when he saw her, nodding in greeting. "Morning, Miss Marshall." "Good morning, Mr. Quinn." She hesitated in the doorway. "I didn't expect anyone to be up yet." "Ranch starts early," he replied with a slight shrug. "Mrs. Maxwell usually handles breakfast, but I thought she might appreciate sleeping in, given her condition." Glory moved toward the stove. "I can take over. Cooking breakfast is something I know how to do." Vince stepped aside, watching as she assessed the kitchen, locating coffee, flour, and other necessities with a practiced eye. "You don't have to prove yourself right away," he said quietly. Glory paused in her movements. Yes, I do. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Quinn. Nobody thinks you are. She turned to face him fully. I saw the way Mr. and Mrs. Maxwell looked at me last night, with pity. With compassion, Vince corrected. There's a difference. Glory returned to her task, measuring coffee into the pot with perhaps more force than necessary. I don't need either. Vince was silent for a long moment. Then, maybe not, but they need to give it. Makes them feel like they're doing something in the face of tragedy. His insight surprised her. She glanced at him, seeing not just the sturdy cowboy, but something deeper, a man who understood loss intimately. Mrs. Maxwell mentioned you're a widower, she said, then immediately regretted her bluntness. I apologize, that was forward of me. Vince's expression remained steady, though something flickered in his eyes. It's the truth. No need to apologize for speaking it. He moved toward the door. I'll let the men know breakfast will be ready soon. The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but the Maxwells take their meals here in the main house. After he left, Glory worked efficiently, drawing on years of experience cooking for her family. By the time Clara appeared in the kitchen, looking refreshed despite her advanced pregnancy, Glory had biscuits baking, bacon frying, and coffee percolating. "Oh my," Clara exclaimed, "you didn't have to do all this." "It's why I'm here, isn't it?" Glory replied, "to help you." Clara smiled gently. "Yes, but I wasn't expecting you to take charge so quickly. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Glory settled into life at Boxem Ranch. She threw herself into her duties with single-minded determination, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaning the main house until it gleamed, doing laundry, helping with mending, and assisting Clara with dinner preparations. She worked until exhaustion overtook her each night, hoping that physical fatigue would keep the nightmares at bay. It didn't always work. Often, she woke in the darkest hours, her heart pounding, the sound of rushing water in her ears. On those nights, she would sit by her window, watching the stars and wondering how they could continue to shine in a world so full of senseless tragedy. She saw Vince daily, as he came and went about his ranch duties. Unlike some of the other hands who treated her with awkward sympathy or, occasionally, with too much interest, Vince maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite but never intrusive, seeming to understand her need for space. Until the Sunday Clara insisted Glory accompany the family to church. "I don't think that would be appropriate," Glory protested, her hands stilling in the dough she was kneading. "I'm your employee, not family." "Nonsense," Clara replied firmly. "Everyone from the ranch attends services together." "Besides," she added more gently, "community is important, especially after loss." Glory felt panic rising in her chest. The thought of sitting in church, hearing platitudes about God's plan and mysterious ways made her physically ill. "Mrs. Maxwell, I appreciate your kindness, but I can't." Clara studied her with understanding eyes. "You're angry at God." Glory looked away, unable to deny it. "That's all right," Clara continued softly. "He can handle your anger. Sometimes it's the first step back to faith." "I don't want to find my way back," Glory admitted, the words torn from her against her will. "I trusted him my entire life, and he let my family drown while I watched, helpless." Her voice broke. "What kind of God does that?" Clara reached for her hands, heedless of the flour coating them. "I don't have answers for you, Glory. No one does. But isolating yourself from community won't ease your pain." In the end, Glory reluctantly agreed to attend, if only to repay the kindness the Maxwells had shown her. That Sunday morning, she donned a dress that Clara had altered to fit her, a simple blue cotton that was the nicest thing she'd worn since the flood, and climbed into the wagon beside her employers. Vince rode alongside on horseback, dressed in his best shirt with his boots polished to a shine. He tipped his hat to Glory as they set out, his expression unreadable beneath the brim. The church in the nearby town was a modest white clapboard building with a small steeple. As they approached, Glory felt her anxiety mounting. She hadn't set foot in a church since before the flood, and the sight of the cross atop the steeple made her stomach clench. Robert helped Clara down from the wagon, then offered his hand to Glory. As her feet touched the ground, she felt frozen, Unable to move toward the church steps where other ranchers and townspeople were gathering, Vince appeared at her side, having dismounted and secured his horse. "You all right, Miss Marshall?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "You don't have to go in," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "We could walk instead, no one would mind." The offer of escape was tempting, but Glory forced herself to shake her head. "I gave my word to Mrs. Maxwell." Vince nodded, respecting her decision. "Then I'll sit with you if that's all right." The simple offer of solidarity steadied her. "Thank you." They entered the church together, finding seats in the back pew. The Maxwells sat near the front as befitted their status in the community. Glory kept her eyes fixed on her hands, afraid to look at the cross or the stained glass depicting Jesus as the Good Shepherd. The service began with a hymn, the familiar words of Amazing Grace rising around her. Glory couldn't bring herself to sing, though Vince beside her hummed quietly, his deep voice a comforting rumble. The preacher, a balding man with kind eyes, delivered a sermon on faith during trials. Every word felt like a personal attack to Glory, though she knew rationally that the man couldn't possibly know her situation. She sat rigid, her jaw clenched, fighting the urge to flee. "The Lord tests our faith through tribulation," the preacher intoned. "Like gold refined by fire, we emerge stronger, purer, more precious to him." A small sound escaped Glory's throat, not quite a sob, but close. Vince shifted slightly beside her, his arm brushing against hers in what might have been an accidental movement but felt like deliberate support. When the collection plate came around, Glory had nothing to give. The few coins she'd earned from the Maxwells were carefully saved toward new clothing and essentials. Shame heated her face as she passed the plate without contributing. Vince dropped in several coins, then whispered, "From both of us," so only she could hear. The simple kindness nearly undid her. By the time the service ended, Glory was trembling with the effort of containing her emotions. As the congregation filed out, exchanging greetings and pleasantries, she slipped away, needing air and solitude. She found herself behind the church in a small cemetery where weathered headstones marked the final resting places of the town's departed. Here at last she let the tears come, sinking onto a stone bench beneath an oak tree. She didn't hear Vince approach until his shadow fell across her. He stood awkwardly, hat in hand, uncertainty in his stance. "Should I go?" he asked simply. Glory wiped at her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. "No," she surprised herself by saying, "you can stay." He sat beside her, leaving space between them, his gaze on the distant hills rather than on her tear-streaked face. "I haven't been inside a church since I buried my wife and daughter," he said after a long silence. "Today was my first time back." Glory looked at him in surprise. "Why did you come today?" The corner of his mouth lifted in a sad half-smile. "Thought you might need someone who understands." "Understands what?" "How it feels when prayers go unanswered." The simple statement hit her with the force of truth. Yes, that was it exactly, the bewildering pain of believing your whole life that God listened, only to discover in your darkest hour that the heavens were silent. "How do you still believe?" she asked, genuinely curious. "After what happened to your family," Vince was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. "I didn't for a while," he finally admitted, "was angry enough to burn down the world, drank too much, picked fights. Didn't care if I lived or died. What changed? Nothing dramatic, just time passing. And one day I saw a sunset so beautiful it hurt to look at it, made me think maybe there was still something good in the world." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Sounds foolish saying it out loud." "It doesn't," Glory said softly. She hesitated, then added, "I keep waiting to feel something besides this emptiness, this anger, but it's like there's nothing left inside me." "It'll come," Vince assured her. "The feeling might not be what you expect, but it'll come." They sat in companionable silence until the Maxwells found them, ready to return to the ranch. On the journey back, Glory found herself watching Vince as he rode alongside the wagon, his profile strong against the backdrop of rolling hills. For the first time since the flood, she felt something stir within her that wasn't grief or anger. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but undeniably there a flicker of connection to another human being who had walked through darkness and somehow found his way back to light. Spring gave way to early summer, and with it came the ranch's busiest season. Glory found herself working from dawn till dusk, helping Clara prepare meals for hungry cowhands, doing endless laundry, and tending the kitchen garden that provided fresh vegetables for the household. The work suited her. Physical labor left little time for dwelling on what couldn't be changed. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, Glory began to find moments of peace in the satisfaction of removing a stubborn stain from a shirt, in the scent of bread baking, in the simple pleasure of watching the sunset from the porch after dinner. Clara's pregnancy advanced, making movement increasingly difficult for her. Glory took on more responsibilities, insisting that the older woman rest whenever possible. In those quiet afternoons when Clara napped and Glory worked alone in the kitchen or parlor, she sometimes found herself humming the old hymns of her childhood, not in worship, but in memory of simpler times. She saw Vince daily as he came for meals or to consult with Robert about ranch matters. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and something unspoken would pass between them, an understanding, a shared knowledge of loss that set them apart from others. One evening in late June, as Glory sat on the back porch shelling peas, Vince approached, his hat in his hands. "Evening, Miss Marshall," he greeted her formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the formality. "Mr. Quinn," she replied with a nod, continuing her task. "Something I can help you with," he shifted his weight, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. "Actually, I was wondering if you might like to accompany me to town tomorrow. Mrs. Maxwell mentioned needing supplies, and I thought you might welcome a change of scenery." Glory's hands stilled. Was he asking her to accompany him socially, or simply offering her a practical opportunity to leave the ranch? She'd been so focused on survival that the possibility of any other kind of relationship hadn't crossed her mind. "I would have to ask Mrs. Maxwell if she can spare me," she said cautiously. Vince nodded. "Of course, it was just a thought." Before he could retreat, Glory added, "But I would like to go if she agrees." A smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. "Good, that's good." The next day, with Clara's enthusiastic blessing and a list of supplies to purchase, Glory found herself riding beside Vince in a small wagon. She wore her best dress, still borrowed, though Clara had promised to help her make new ones soon, and had braided her hair with extra care. "Thank you for inviting me," she said as they traveled the dusty road toward town. "I haven't left the ranch since arriving." Vince flicked the reins gently. "Thought it might do you good to see something besides ranch buildings and cattle." The town was small but bustling, a single main street lined with essential businesses. General store, blacksmith, saloon, hotel, and the church they'd attended. People nodded greetings as Vince helped Glory down from the wagon, treating her with the respect due to someone under the Maxwell's protection. They visited the general store first, where Glory carefully selected the items on Clara's list, while Vince spoke with the proprietor about ranch supplies. Watching him, she noted how people naturally deferred to him, seeking his opinion and listening when he spoke. He carried himself with quiet confidence, not arrogance. After completing their purchases, Vince surprised her by suggesting lunch at the hotel restaurant. "Unless you'd rather head back," he added quickly. "No, lunch would be nice." The truth was, Glory was enjoying this brief taste of normalcy, of being something other than a flood survivor or a ranch employee. The hotel restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and vases of wildflowers on each table. They ordered beef stew and fresh bread, falling into comfortable conversation about ranch matters. "Mrs. Maxwell's time is coming soon," Glory commented as they ate. "She's carrying low." "My mother always said that meant a boy." The mention of her mother came naturally, without the usual stab of pain. It startled her enough that she fell silent, suddenly aware of how much had changed within her over these past weeks. Vince seemed to sense her shift in mood. "You miss them," he said simply. Not a question, but an acknowledgement. Glory nodded. "Every day, but it's different now, the missing. Less like drowning, more like carrying something heavy, Yes, she looked at him with newfound appreciation. Exactly like that. After lunch, they strolled down the main street, Glory pausing to admire a display of fabrics in the dressmaker's window. You should get something, Vince suggested. For a new dress, Glory shook her head. I'm saving for that, but not quite yet, Vince frowned slightly. The Maxwells would advance you the money, you know. They think highly of you. I know, but I'd rather earn it honestly first. She turned from the window. I lost everything, Mr. Quinn. The only way I know to rebuild is one piece at a time with my own hands. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, I admire that about you, Miss Marshall, your determination. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. They continued their walk, stopping occasionally to examine storefront displays or exchange greetings with townspeople. By the time they started back to the ranch, Glory felt lighter somehow, as if the simple act of walking through town as a normal person rather than a victim had restored something vital within her. As they neared the ranch, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Glory glanced up to see heavy clouds gathering on the horizon, an afternoon thunderstorm brewing. We'll beat it home, Vince assured her, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. But the storm moved quicker than anticipated, and they were still a mile from the ranch when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Glory felt her chest tighten as the rain increased in intensity, the sound of it pattering on the wagon's canvas cover bringing unwelcome memories flooding back. Her breath came faster, her hands clenching in her lap. Vince noticed immediately. Glory, what's wrong? It was the first time he'd used her given name, but she barely registered it, too caught in the grip of rising panic. The rain, she managed to gasp. I can't. The sound understanding dawned in his eyes. Without hesitation, he pulled the wagon to a halt beneath a large oak tree that offered some shelter from the downpour. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Listen to me, he said firmly. You're safe. It's just a summer storm. It'll pass quickly. Glory struggled to control her breathing, fighting against the memories that threatened to overwhelm her: the roar of the floodwaters, the screams of her family, the terrible silence afterward. I keep seeing them, she whispered, every time it rains. I see them being swept away, and I couldn't save them. I prayed and prayed, but God didn't listen. Vince tightened his hold on her. I know, he said quietly. I know exactly how that feels. Something in his voice penetrated her panic. She looked up to find his eyes, usually so calm and steady, filled with a pain that mirrored her own. After Sarah, my wife, and the baby died, I used to wake up thinking I heard the baby crying, he confessed. I'd get up to check on her, forgetting for those first few seconds that she was gone. And then remembering, it was like losing them all over again every time. Glory felt tears mingling with the raindrops on her face. Does it ever stop hurting? Vince hesitated, then answered honestly. No, but it changes, becomes part of you instead of all of you. The rain continued to fall around them, but Glory found her panic receding as she focused on Vince's steady presence, the solid warmth of him beside her. They sat in silence, watching the storm, two survivors finding solace in shared understanding. When the downpour finally slowed to a gentle patter, Vince reluctantly removed his arm from around her shoulders. Better, he asked. Glory nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her breakdown. I'm sorry, don't apologize, he interrupted gently, not for feeling. As they continued toward the ranch, the clouds began to break apart, allowing shafts of late afternoon sunlight to penetrate. A rainbow arched across the eastern sky, brilliant against the retreating storm. Glory looked at it with mixed emotions. Once she would have seen it as God's promise never again to flood the earth, a covenant she now found bitterly ironic. But there was undeniable beauty in the phenomenon, a reminder that even after devastation, color and light could return to the world. Pretty, isn't it? Vince commented, following her gaze. Yes, she admitted. Despite everything, he glanced at her, something like hope in his expression. Sometimes, despite everything is the most honest kind of beauty there is. Glory considered his words as they approached the ranch, where lamps were already being lit against the early evening darkness brought by the storm. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps there was value in the beauty that persisted despite loss, despite pain, despite faithlessness. It wasn't redemption or restoration of what she'd lost, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. July brought scorching heat and the busiest time at the ranch. The cattle drive to market was scheduled for mid-month, which meant all hands were working double time to prepare. Even Glory found her duties increased as she helped Clara preserve the garden's bounty and prepare extra food for the men. Clara's pregnancy had reached its final stages, leaving her uncomfortable and fatigued. The doctor from town visited regularly, predicting the baby would arrive before August. Robert hovered anxiously, dividing his attention between ranch business and his wife's well-being. In the midst of this activity, Glory became aware of subtle changes in her relationship with Vince. Since their trip to town and the incident during the rainstorm, a new ease had developed between them. He no longer addressed her as Miss Marshall, but simply as Glory, and she found herself using his first name in return. Sometimes he would bring her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range, presenting them awkwardly but with genuine pleasure. Other times, he'd linger after dinner, helping her with dishes or simply sitting on the porch with her as darkness fell, talking of inconsequential things or sharing comfortable silence. One evening, as they sat watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Vince asked, "Do you ever think about going back to the valley?" Glory considered the question carefully. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but there's nothing left for me there. Some folks are rebuilding." "Land's still good once it dries out properly," she shook her head. "I couldn't, too many ghosts." Vince nodded, understanding. "Where will you go then, when you've saved enough?" The question startled her. She'd been so focused on surviving day to day that she hadn't thought much beyond the immediate future. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I hadn't planned that far ahead." "You could stay here," Vince suggested, his tone carefully casual. "The Maxwells think highly of you. And once the baby comes, Clara will need help more than ever." Glory glanced at him, wondering if there was more to his suggestion than practical considerations. "I could," she agreed cautiously. "If they'll have me, they will." His certainty warmed her. "And others would be glad if you stayed as well." Before she could ask him to elaborate, Clara called from inside the house, needing assistance. The moment passed, but Glory found herself thinking about his words as she helped Clara prepare for bed. Others would be glad if she stayed. Was he speaking of himself? The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. She hadn't considered the possibility of forming new attachments after losing her family. It felt almost like betrayal to think of building a new life, finding new people to care for. And yet, Vince understood loss in a way few others could. He didn't offer empty platitudes or expect her grief to follow a predictable path. When she was with him, she felt less broken somehow, as if the jagged edges of her heart aligned with the similar breaks in his own. The next day, as Glory was hanging laundry in the blazing summer sun, she heard shouts from the direction of the bunkhouse. Looking up, she saw men running toward the main house. One of them, spotting her, called out, "Miss Glory, get Mrs. Maxwell ready. The boss is bringing the doctor." Clara's time had come, several weeks earlier than expected. Glory rushed inside to find her employer already in the throes of labor, her face pale with pain and fear. "It's too soon," Clara gasped, clutching Glory's hand. "The baby's not due until August." "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Glory assured her, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Let's get you comfortable. The doctor's on his way." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. The doctor arrived, grave-faced but competent, ordering hot water and clean linens. Robert paced anxiously outside the bedroom door until the doctor sent him to the barn to wait with the other men. Glory remained, assisting the doctor and offering what comfort she could to Clara as her labor progressed. It was hard, watching another woman endure the pain of childbirth, knowing her own mother had gone through this same process to bring her into the world. For a moment, Glory's grief threatened to overwhelm her again, but she pushed it aside. Clara needed her strength now, not her sorrow. As afternoon turned to evening, Clara's labor intensified. The doctor grew increasingly concerned, murmuring about the baby's position and Clara's failing strength. "Mrs. Maxwell," he said finally, "I need to try to turn the baby. It will be painful but necessary if we're to save you both." Clara, exhausted and frightened, looked to Glory. "Stay with me, of course," Glory promised, taking her hand. "I'm right here." What followed was harrowing. Glory had assisted at births before, but never one so difficult. Clara screamed as the doctor worked to reposition the baby, her grip on Glory's hand almost crushing. Glory spoke soothingly, wiping Clara's brow and praying despite herself for mother and child to survive. Finally, as the first stars appeared in the night sky, a thin wail announced the arrival of Robert and Clara's son. The doctor quickly cleaned and swaddled the tiny infant, placing him in Clara's arms before turning his attention to stemming her bleeding. "He's perfect," Clara whispered, tears streaking her face as she gazed at her son. "Glory, look at him. Isn't he perfect?" Glory felt her throat tighten with emotion as she looked at the newborn's scrunched red face. "He's beautiful," she agreed softly. "You did wonderfully, Clara." After ensuring that both mother and baby were stable, the doctor allowed Robert to enter. The look on his face when he first saw his wife and son was one Glory knew she would remember all her life, a mixture of awe, relief, and love so powerful it seemed to fill the room. "A boy," Clara told him weakly. "A strong boy." Robert knelt beside the bed, one hand gently touching his son's downy head. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank God for you both." Glory slipped from the room, giving the new family privacy for their first moments together. She made her way outside, needing air after the long, tense hours indoors. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. She found Vince sitting on the porch steps, his hat beside him, head bowed. He looked up at the sound of her approach, rising quickly. "The baby?" he asked, tension evident in every line of his body. "A boy," Glory told him with a tired smile. Healthy though small, Clara's exhausted but recovering. The relief on Vince's face was palpable. "Thank goodness, the men have been worried. Robert's like family to most of us." Glory sank onto the steps, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Vince sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "You look done in," he observed. "When did you last eat?" Glory couldn't remember. "This morning, maybe. There wasn't time." Without another word, Vince rose and disappeared into the house, returning moments later with bread, cheese, and a cup of water. "It's not much, but it'll hold you until morning." The simple act of kindness touched her deeply. She accepted the food gratefully, realizing as she ate how hungry she truly was. "You were a godsend to them today," Vince said quietly. "Clara told Robert she couldn't have managed without you." Glory shook her head. "I just did what needed doing." That's what makes it special. Not everyone steps up when they're needed. They sat in companionable silence as Glory finished her impromptu meal. The night was peaceful, filled with the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. "I kept thinking about my mother," Glory admitted after a while. "How she must have gone through this same thing when I was born, how she'd never see this baby or any children I might have someday." She swallowed hard. "It still hurts, but differently now, less like a raw wound, more like something that shaped me." Vince nodded. "That's how healing works, I think. The pain doesn't disappear, it gets woven into who you are." Glory turned to look at him, really look at him, in the silver light of the moon. The strong profile, the kind eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow, the gentle hands that had offered support when she needed it most. "You've helped me," she said simply. "These past months, I don't think I've thanked you properly." Vince shook his head. "No thanks needed. I understand what it's like to lose your footing in the world. Sometimes all you need is someone to stand beside you until you find it again." On impulse, Glory reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and calloused and reassuringly solid. "I still don't know if I can believe again," she whispered. "In God, in purpose, in any of it." Vince was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Finally, he said, "Maybe you don't have to figure that out all at once. Maybe it's enough to believe in smaller things first, like sunrise coming after darkness or new life after loss." Glory considered his words, finding wisdom in them. Perhaps faith, like healing, wasn't an all-or-nothing proposition. Perhaps it could return gradually, in moments of beauty and connection that reminded her the world still held goodness alongside its tragedies. "Thank you," she said again, squeezing his hand. Vince smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "For what it's worth, Glory Marshall, I believe in you, in your strength, your kindness, your ability to rebuild your life however you choose to do it." In that moment, beneath the vast Texas sky, Glory felt something within her shift, not a dramatic change, but a subtle realignment, like a bone that had finally been properly set and could now begin to heal. She didn't yet know what form her future would take, or whether Vince Quinn would figure prominently in it. But for the first time since the flood, she found herself looking forward rather than back, and the prospect held more promise than dread. The weeks following the birth of Robert and Clara's son, whom they named James, after Clara's father, were filled with adjustments for everyone at the Box M Ranch. Glory took on most of the household duties while Clara recovered, dividing her time between regular chores and helping with the baby. To her surprise, she found genuine joy in caring for little James. His tiny fingers, his unfocused gaze that would one day sharpen into awareness, his complete trust in those who held him, all of it awakened something in Glory that she had thought drowned in the floodwaters. A capacity for tenderness, for hope, for looking toward tomorrow rather than dwelling on yesterday. Vince, too, seemed drawn to the infant. Glory often found him visiting the main house during odd moments of the day, ostensibly to consult with Robert, but inevitably ending up in the parlor where Clara usually sat with the baby. He would stand awkwardly, hat in hands, watching the child with an expression that mingled wonder and old grief. One afternoon, as Glory folded laundry while Clara nursed James, Vince appeared in the doorway. "Ladies," he greeted them, ducking his head slightly, "don't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Clara assured him. "Come in, Vince. Glory was just telling me about the new dress she's making." Glory felt her cheeks warm. She had finally saved enough to purchase fabric from the general store, a pretty calico in shades of blue that Clara was helping her fashion into a proper dress. It was a small thing, but it represented progress, a step away from charity toward self-sufficiency. "I'm sure it will be lovely," Vince said, his eyes meeting Glory's briefly before returning to Clara and the baby. "How's the little one today?" "Growing stronger by the hour," Clara replied proudly. "Would you like to hold him? I need to stretch my legs a bit." Before Vince could protest, Clara had risen and placed the swaddled infant in his arms. Glory watched, curious, as the tall cowboy cradled the tiny bundle with surprising gentleness. "Support his head," Clara instructed, adjusting Vince's hold slightly. "There, just like that." An emotion Glory couldn't quite name flickered across Vince's face as he gazed down at James. Something like longing, perhaps, or remembrance. "I'll just check on dinner," Clara announced, with a meaningful glance at Glory that clearly communicated her intention to leave them alone. She swept from the room before either could object. Glory continued folding laundry, stealing glances at Vince and the baby. The contrast between his weathered hands and the infant's delicate features was striking. "You're good with him," she observed. Vince looked up, a shadow of old pain in his eyes. "Had some practice once upon a time, though it's been a while." Glory set aside the folded sheet she was holding and moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his expression. "Your daughter, what was her name?" "Elizabeth," he answered softly. "After my mother, we called her Beth." "That's beautiful." Vince nodded, his attention returning to James, who had wrapped one tiny hand around his finger. She was just starting to smile when the fever took her, 3 months old. Glory's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry." "Sarah went first," Vince continued, as if a dam had broken within him. "She was so strong always, but the influenza, it took her in 2 days. I thought Beth might be spared, but—" His voice trailed off. Glory reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "It's not fair what happened to them. To you." "No," he agreed. "Just like what happened to your family wasn't fair, but here we are, still breathing." "Still breathing," she echoed, It was true, though there had been moments after the flood when she'd questioned the value of that simple act. Now, watching Vince with baby James, she found herself grateful for each breath, each heartbeat that carried her forward into whatever lay ahead. James began to fuss, his little face scrunching in preparation for a wail. Vince looked momentarily alarmed. "Here," Glory said, holding out her arms. "Let me." She took the baby, cradling him against her shoulder and patting his back gently. James settled almost immediately, his head nestled in the crook of her neck. "You're a natural," Vince observed, his voice warm with admiration. Glory smiled, surprising herself with how genuine it felt. "I helped raise my brothers. The youngest was only 4 when—" She paused, swallowing hard. When the flood came, Vince's expression softened with understanding. "Tell me about them, your brothers, your parents, if you want who that is." No one had asked her that before, to share memories of her family rather than just expressing sympathy for their loss. Glory found herself wanting to tell him, to make her loved ones real to someone else so they wouldn't exist only in her own fading recollections. She sat in the rocking chair by the window, still holding James, and began to speak. She told Vince about her father, strong and kind, who could coax crops from the most stubborn soil. About her mother, whose hands were always busy but never too busy to offer comfort. About her brothers, one studious and one mischievous, both beloved. She spoke of Christmases and birthdays, of everyday moments that had seemed ordinary at the time but now shimmered with the patina of precious memory. And as she spoke, she realized that remembering didn't have to mean drowning in grief. It could also mean honoring those who had shaped her, carrying their love forward into whatever life she built now. Vince listened intently, asking questions that showed he was truly hearing her, truly caring about the people she described. When Clara returned, she found them still talking, the baby sleeping peacefully in Glory's arms. That evening after dinner, Vince asked Glory to walk with him. The August night was warm, crickets singing in the tall grass as they strolled away from the main house toward a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding countryside. "I wanted to thank you," Vince said as they reached the top of the rise, "for trusting me with your memories today." Glory gazed out at the darkening landscape, the first stars appearing overhead. It felt good to talk about them, to remember the happy times, not just the end. Vince nodded. "After Sarah and Beth died, I couldn't bear to hear their names spoken. Now I'm afraid of forgetting the sound of Sarah's laugh or the way Beth smelled after her bath." He paused. "Sharing memories keeps them alive somehow." Glory turned to face him fully. In the gathering dusk, his features were softened, his eyes reflecting the first faint stars. "Vince," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about believing in smaller things first." "Oh," his attention focused entirely on her. "I still don't know about God or why things happen the way they do, but I'm starting to believe in possibilities again. In tomorrow being different than today, in life continuing even after loss." Vince's smile was slow and genuine. "That's a good start." "It is, isn't it?" Glory took a deep breath, gathering courage. "There's something else I'm beginning to believe in, too." "What's that?" "This," she whispered, and rose on tiptoes to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief, tentative, but it sent warmth coursing through her veins, a reminder that she was alive, that her heart could still feel something besides grief. When she pulled back, Vince was looking at her with wonder, as if she'd handed him some precious gift. "Glory," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. "I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is," she admitted. "But I wanted you to know that you've helped me find my way back to living, not just surviving." Vince reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "I can wait," he said simply, "for however long you need." They stood together on the rise as darkness deepened around them. Two souls who had endured the worst life could offer and somehow found their way back to hope, back to the possibility of love. Not the innocent love of youth, untested and untried, but something deeper, a love tempered by loss, strengthened by shared understanding, resilient enough to withstand whatever storms might yet come. As summer gave way to fall, changes came to the Boxem ranch. Baby James thrived, growing plumper and more alert each day. Clara regained her strength and resumed many of her duties, though Glory continued to help with the heaviest work. Robert expanded the herd, purchasing cattle from a neighboring rancher who was moving east. For Glory, the most significant change was internal. The paralyzing grief that had consumed her in the early days after the flood gradually transformed into something she could carry rather than something that carried her. She still thought of her family daily, still missed them with an ache that would never entirely fade, but she found herself increasingly able to look forward as well as back. Her relationship with Vince developed slowly, carefully. They spent time together whenever his duties and hers allowed, walking in the evenings, talking on the porch after dinner, occasionally riding to check the furthest pastures when Glory could be spared from the house. They were never entirely alone, always within sight of the ranch buildings, maintaining propriety while exploring the growing connection between them. Sometimes they spoke of their lost loved ones, sharing memories both painful and precious. Other times they talked of simpler things, books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had harbored before tragedy reshaped their lives. And sometimes they simply enjoyed comfortable silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. In late September, Clara approached Glory as she worked in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables before frost could claim them. "You've become indispensable to us," Clara said warmly, bouncing James on her hip. "Robert and I were talking last night about how fortunate we were that Vince found you." Glory smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'm the fortunate one. You took me in when I had nothing." Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss. Clara sat on a nearby bench, settling James more comfortably in her arms. "Winter will be here before we know it, and with it, the holidays. I was wondering if you might consider a more permanent arrangement here at Boxham." Glory looked up, surprised. "Permanent?" "Yes. Not as hired help, but as family. Robert's sister will be joining us for Christmas. She lives in San Antonio with her husband, and we thought it would be nice if you had your own place by then. The old foreman's cabin has been empty since Mr. Jennings retired last spring. It's small but solid with its own garden plot. You could have independence while still being part of the ranch." Tears pricked at Glory's eyes at the unexpected offer. "I don't know what to say. You've already done so much nonsense," Clara interrupted gently. "You've earned this 10 times over with your hard work. Besides," she added with a knowing smile, "I suspect you might appreciate some privacy, given how things seem to be developing between you and a certain cowboy." Glory felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" Clara laughed. "Only to anyone with eyes. Vince Quinn hasn't smiled so much in all the years I've known him as he has these past few months." Her expression softened. "He's a good man, Glory, one of the best Robert's ever employed." "I know," Glory said quietly, "but I'm still finding my way, and so is he." "Of course you are. There's no rush." Clara shifted James to her other arm. "So, what do you think about the cabin?" Glory considered the offer. Her own place, however modest, represented another step toward rebuilding her life. A home of her own where she could welcome visitors, including Vince, with dignity rather than as a charity case. "I would be honored," she said finally. "And grateful?" Clara beamed. "Wonderful, I'll tell Robert. He'll have the men fix up anything that needs attention before you move in." That evening, Glory shared the news with Vince as they walked along the creek that ran behind the main house. The trees were beginning to turn, golden leaves drifting down to float on the water's surface. "Your own cabin," Vince said, clearly pleased. "That's a real vote of confidence from the Maxwells." "It is, isn't it?" Glory picked up a fallen leaf, twirling it between her fingers. "I never expected to feel settled again after everything." Vince was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the gently flowing creek. "Does it scare you?" "Putting down roots again," Glory considered the question carefully. "A little," she admitted. "What if something happens? What if there's another flood or fire or—" "There might be," Vince interrupted gently. "No one can promise there won't be more hardship. But there's a difference between being cautious and being afraid to live at all." Glory nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "When did you become so wise, Vincent Quinn?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "Not wisdom, just hard-won experience." He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I'm glad you're staying, Glory, real glad." The simple touch, the sincerity in his voice sent warmth spreading through her. They continued walking, hand in hand, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. October brought crisp mornings and the vibrant colors of autumn to the Texas countryside. The ranch hummed with activity as preparations for winter intensified. Hay stored, wood chopped, preserves put up, cattle moved to more sheltered pastures. Glory divided her time between helping Clara and preparing the foreman's cabin for her move. The small structure was indeed sound, as Clara had promised, though it needed cleaning and some minor repairs. Robert assigned 2 of the younger ranch hands to fix the leaky roof and replace a broken window, while Vince volunteered to rebuild the sagging front porch steps. One crisp afternoon, Glory was scrubbing the cabin's plank floors when Vince arrived with lumber for the steps. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, admiring her progress. "Place is starting to look like a home," he observed. Glory sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's getting there." The previous tenant wasn't much for cleanliness, Vince grinned. Old Jennings was a good foreman but a terrible housekeeper, bachelor his whole life. He set down his tools. "Need help with anything before I start on those steps?" Glory glanced around the one-room cabin. She'd already scrubbed the small cast iron stove, washed the single window, and swept down cobwebs from the corners. The floor was her final task. "I'm nearly finished here, but I wouldn't say no to help moving the bed later. Clara's giving me one from the main house. Consider it done." Vince hesitated, then added, "I brought you something, a housewarming gift of sorts." From his saddlebag, he produced a small object wrapped in a bandana. Glory dried her hands on her apron and accepted it curiously. Unwrapping the fabric, she found a hand-carved wooden box, small enough to fit in her palm, with a simple but beautiful design of wildflowers etched into the lid. "Vince, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny silver cross on a delicate chain. Glory looked up at him, confused. "I don't understand." Vince shifted his weight, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I've been thinking about what you said, about losing your faith after the flood." He gestured toward the necklace. "That was my mother's. She gave it to Sarah when we married. I thought you might like to have it, not because I expect you to believe again right away, but as a reminder that you're not alone in questioning and doubting." Glory stared at the small silver cross, emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to reject it, to tell Vince she was done with symbols of a faith that had failed her when she needed it most. But another part recognized the significance of the gift, not just the object itself, but the meaning behind it, the trust Vince was placing in her by sharing this piece of his past. "I can't accept this," she said finally. "It should stay in your family." Vince stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "You don't understand, Glory. I want it to stay in my family. I hope. That is, I believe." He faltered, then took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is that I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, standing in the mud and ruin, your chin up despite everything you'd lost." Glory's heart hammered in her chest. She had known, somehow, that they were moving toward this moment, but hearing the words spoken aloud still staggered her. "Vince," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing, still finding your way. I don't expect an answer today or tomorrow or even next month. I just wanted you to know where I stand." His voice softened. "I've lost too much in my life to waste time hiding how I feel." Glory looked down at the silver cross nestled in its wooden box, then back at the man standing before her, strong, steady, patient, a man who had endured his own ocean of grief and emerged with his capacity for love intact. "I'm not ready to wear this," she said finally, closing the box carefully. "Not yet, but I'll keep it safe until I am." Relief and understanding mingled in Vince's expression. "That's all I ask." Glory placed the box on the small shelf above the stove, where it would be visible daily, a reminder not of lost faith, but of the possibility that faith, like love, could be rebuilt differently than before, perhaps stronger for having been broken and mended. Now, she said, turning back to Vince with a smile, those steps won't fix themselves. As October gave way to November, Glory settled into her new home. The cabin, though simple, became a reflection of her neat, practical, but with touches of beauty. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, a quilt Clara had helped her make draped over the bed, curtains she'd sewn herself from cheerful yellow fabric. Her routine adjusted to include her own housekeeping as well as continued assistance to Clara, particularly with baby James, who had developed a special fondness for Glory. She still took most meals at the main house, but occasionally prepared simple suppers in her own cabin, sometimes inviting Vince to join her. Those evenings were precious to Glory, sitting across the small table from him, sharing food she'd cooked, talking about their days. It felt like practice for something more permanent, though neither of them spoke of the future directly. Vince had made his feelings clear. Now he was giving her the space and time to discover her own. As Thanksgiving approached, the entire ranch bustled with preparations. Clara planned an elaborate feast for the household and all the hands, many of whom had nowhere else to go for the holiday. Glory threw herself into the cooking, finding unexpected joy in creating dishes her mother had taught her: cornbread stuffing, sweet potato pie, cranberry sauce made from berries Robert had specially ordered from back east. The night before Thanksgiving, as Glory walked back to her cabin after a long day of preparation, she was surprised to find Vince waiting on her porch. He stood as she approached, and even in the dim light she could see tension in his posture. "Vince, is something wrong?" "No, not wrong exactly." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I've been offered a job as foreman on a ranch near San Antonio." Glory felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "San Antonio, that's far." "2 days' ride," he confirmed. "It's a good position, more money, more responsibility." "When would you go?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "After the new year, if I accept." Vince studied her face. "I haven't given them my answer yet. Wanted to talk to you first." Glory's mind raced. Vince leaving. The possibility had never occurred to her, so fixed had he seemed in her new conception of home and safety. The thought of continuing at Boxham without him left her feeling hollow. "It's a good opportunity," she said finally, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You should accept." Vince stepped closer, his expression intent. "Is that what you want, Glory, for me to leave?" "Of course not, but I can't ask you to stay just because." She trailed off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Because what?" Vince prompted softly. Glory looked up at him, the man who had found her in her darkest moment and steadily, patiently helped her find her way back to light. The man whose quiet strength had become as necessary to her as air. "Because I love you," she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. "But love isn't always enough, is it? We both know that better than most." Vince's expression softened. "Sometimes it is, sometimes it's the only thing that matters." He took her hands in his. "I don't want to leave you, Glory. But I need to know if there's a reason for me to stay, a real reason, beyond what we've already built." Glory understood what he was asking, not just for her love, which she had finally acknowledged, but for a future together, for commitment in a world where nothing was guaranteed. "I'm still afraid," she confessed, "of losing everything again, of letting myself believe in forever when forever can end in an instant." Vince nodded, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "I know, me too, but here's what I've figured out: being afraid of loss doesn't prevent it. It just keeps you from fully living in the meantime." The simple wisdom of his words struck Glory deeply. Wasn't that what she'd been doing these past months? Living cautiously, holding part of herself in reserve, as if that would somehow protect her from further pain. "Come inside," she said, making a decision. "It's getting cold." In the warmth of her cabin, lit by the soft glow of the lamp, Glory moved to the shelf where Vince's gift still sat. She opened the small wooden box and removed the silver cross, holding it carefully in her palm. "You once told me that if I couldn't believe, you'd believe enough for both of us," she said, remembering his words from months ago, spoken on that first journey to the ranch. "I think I'm ready now, not to believe everything I once did, but to have faith in something." "In what?" Vince asked, his voice gentle. "In us. In the possibility that love can be stronger than fear." She held out the necklace to him. "Will you help me put it on?" Vince took the delicate chain, his fingers steady as he fastened it around her neck. The small cross rested just below the hollow of her throat, cool against her skin. "Stay," Glory said, turning to face him fully. "Don't take the job in San Antonio. Stay here with me. We can build something together, something new." The joy that bloomed in Vince's face was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "There's nothing I want more." He cupped her face in his hands, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening as Glory responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. In that moment, all her doubts and fears receded, replaced by the certainty that whatever came next, joy or sorrow, feast or famine, they would face it together. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with a hint of frost silvering the grass. Glory woke early in her cabin, alone but not lonely, the memory of Vince's goodnight kiss still warm on her lips. They had talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams before propriety demanded he return to the bunkhouse. As she dressed for the day's festivities, Glory touched the silver cross at her throat. It wasn't a symbol of blind faith restored, but of something more complex and perhaps more valuable, the courage to open her heart again, to risk loss for the chance of love, to believe that life could be beautiful even after devastation. At the main house, she found Clara already bustling about the kitchen despite Robert's protests that she should rest. "There you are," Clara exclaimed, handing baby James to his father so she could check the oven. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the feast." Glory laughed, tying on her apron. "Not a chance. There's too much to do." As they worked together preparing the meal, Glory found herself filled with unexpected contentment. This wasn't the life she had planned or expected, but it was good, rich with purpose and connection. When Vince appeared in the kitchen doorway, his freshly shaved face breaking into a smile at the sight of her, that contentment deepened into something more profound. The Thanksgiving meal was served outdoors, weather permitting, with long tables set up in the yard for the ranch hands. Robert, at the head of the table with Clara beside him and James in a basket at their feet, offered a simple grace, thanking God for the year's blessings and for bringing new friends into their midst. His gaze rested briefly on Glory as he spoke, and she felt a surge of gratitude for these people who had become her family by choice rather than blood. After the meal, as the men lounged in satisfied lethargy and Clara put James down for a nap, Vince drew Glory aside. "Let's take a walk," he suggested, offering his arm. They strolled away from the ranch buildings toward the creek, now lined with trees in the final stages of autumn glory. The water ran clear and cold, nothing like the raging torrent that had destroyed Glory's former life. "I spoke with Robert this morning," Vince said as they walked. "Told him I'd be declining the San Antonio offer." "How did he take it?" Glory asked, seemed pleased, said he'd been hoping to keep me on. Vince guided her to a fallen log beside the creek where they could sit and watch the water flow. He also mentioned that Mr. Jennings is looking to sell his homestead. "It's not far from here, about 3 miles east, backing up to Boxham land." Glory looked at him questioningly. "Oh. It's a good piece of property, 100 acres with a house already built, though it needs work, decent water source, some grazing land, some tillable." Vince took her hand, his expression serious. "I've been saving most of my wages these past 5 years, not much to spend them on out here. I could make an offer on the place if I had a reason to need a home of my own." Understanding dawned on Glory. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Vincent Quinn?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "Depends on whether you're thinking I'm asking you to marry me." Joy bubbled up within Glory, unexpected and overwhelming. "I am thinking that, yes." "Then that's exactly what I'm asking." Vince's voice grew solemn. "I love you, Glory Marshall. I know we've both seen how fragile life can be, how quickly everything can change. But that's all the more reason not to waste the time we have." He squeezed her hand. "Will you marry me, build a life with me, whatever comes?" Glory looked at the man before her, steady, kind, patient, a man who had known his own share of heartbreak yet still had the courage to love again. She thought of all they had endured separately and all they might face together, the certainty of both joy and sorrow in any life fully lived. "Yes," she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. The kiss they shared was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of faith not in an uncomplicated future, but in their ability to face whatever came together. As they walked back to the ranch hand in hand, Glory glanced up at the clear November sky. For the first time since the flood, she found herself offering up something like a prayer, not a plea or a bargain, but a simple acknowledgement of gratitude for second chances, for the possibility of new life after devastating loss. The silver cross at her throat caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming like a promise. She might never again have the uncomplicated faith of her childhood, but perhaps this new faith tempered by grief, strengthened by love, was more valuable for having been tested by fire and flood. "What are you thinking?" Vince asked, noticing her upturned face. Glory smiled, squeezing his hand. "That sometimes the most beautiful things are built from ruins." The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, a date chosen partly for practicality. Robert's sister and her husband would be visiting for the holidays, and could serve as witnesses, and partly for the symbolism of beginning their new life together at a time traditionally associated with hope and renewal. Clara insisted on hosting the ceremony and celebration at the main house, transforming the parlor with evergreen boughs, red berries, and candles that filled the room with warm, golden light. Glory wore a dress of deep blue that she and Clara had sewn together, with a lace collar that had once belonged to Vince's mother, carefully preserved among his few treasured possessions. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. The local minister officiated, speaking of love's endurance through trials and tribulations. Glory and Vince exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not of unending happiness, but of unwavering support through whatever life might bring. "I take you, Vincent Quinn, as my husband," Glory said, her voice clear and steady despite the emotion filling her heart. "Not with the expectation that you will shield me from all pain, for we know too well that such promises cannot be kept, but with the certainty that whatever storms may come, we will weather them together. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to build with you a life of purpose and meaning, and to love you with all that I am for all the days we are granted." Vince's eyes shone as he responded with similar words, his strong hands gentle as he placed the simple gold band on her finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was both tender and fervent, a seal on promises made with full awareness of life's fragility and beauty. The celebration afterward was joyous music from a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands, dancing in the cleared space of the parlor, a feast prepared by Clara with Glory's assistance in the days leading up to the wedding. Even baby James participated, gurgling happily in the arms of various admirers before finally succumbing to sleep as the evening progressed. As midnight approached, Vince led Glory outside to the porch, where they could have a moment of quiet together beneath the winter stars. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, the name sounding both strange and right on his lips. "How does it feel?" Glory smiled, leaning into the warmth of his embrace. "Like coming home, like starting anew." They had decided to spend their wedding night in Glory's cabin, which would soon be vacated when they moved to the homestead Vince had purchased from Mr. Jennings. The property would need work before it was truly habitable, but they had agreed to tackle the renovations together over the coming months while continuing their duties at Boxem. As they prepared to leave the celebration, Clara pressed a small package into Glory's hands. "A wedding gift," she explained. "Something to remember this day." Later, in the privacy of the cabin, Glory unwrapped the gift to find a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, on the first page, Clara had written, "For new memories, new dreams, new faith. With love, Clara, Robert, and James." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Glory's eyes. She showed it to Vince, who had removed his formal jacket and tie but still looked impossibly handsome in his white shirt and dark trousers. "That was kind of them," he said, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. "Clara knows you better than I realized. She's become like a sister to me," Glory admitted, setting the journal carefully on the small table beside the bed. "I never expected to find a new family after losing my own." Vince took her hands in his. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment. His expression grew serious. Are you happy, Glory? Truly, she considered the question, not with the surface response expected of a bride, but with the deep honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. I am, she said finally. Not with the innocent happiness I might have known before the flood, but with something deeper, something that knows the value of joy because it has known the depth of sorrow. Vince nodded, understanding perfectly. That's the truest kind of happiness, I think. The kind that can withstand reality. He leaned forward to kiss her, and Glory met him halfway, her arms twining around his neck. In this moment, all the loss and pain that had brought them to each other seemed not meaningless, exactly, but transformed, woven into the complex tapestry of a love made stronger by shared understanding of life's fragility. As winter gave way to spring, Glory and Vince divided their time between their duties at Box M and work on their new home. The property Mr. Jennings had sold them was beautiful rolling acres with a small creek running through, good grazing land, and a sturdy if neglected house that had stood empty since the old foreman's wife died years earlier. They tackled the renovations methodically with help from some of the Box M hands when they could be spared. New windows were installed, leaky roof patches repaired, fresh paint applied inside and out. Glory planted a garden, carefully tending young vegetable plants and flower seedlings. Vince built new fencing and repaired the small barn, preparing for the livestock they would eventually acquire. By early April, the house was habitable enough for them to move in permanently, though many projects remained. Their first night in their new home, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It's really ours, Glory marveled, looking out over the land that now belonged to them. Sometimes I still can't believe it. Vince smiled, his arm around her shoulders. Believe it, Mrs. Quinn, this is just the beginning. The following Sunday, they attended church together, as had become their custom. Glory's relationship with faith remained complicated, but she found value in the community worship provided, if not always in the theology. The silver cross that had been Vince's gift remained around her neck, a symbol not of blind belief, but of the journey they were taking together. As they drove home afterward in their small wagon, Glory noticed dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. Looks like a spring storm brewing, she observed. Vince glanced up, assessing the clouds with a practiced eye. Could be a bad one. Those clouds have that greenish tint. By the time they reached their homestead, the wind had picked up considerably, bending the young trees Glory had planted near the house. They hurried to secure loose items and bring in the washing from the line as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Inside, they listened as the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling around the corners of the house. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning illuminated the darkened rooms in brief, brilliant flashes. Glory felt her chest tighten as the storm's ferocity increased. The sound of rushing water filled her ears not from outside, but from her memories of the flood that had taken her family. Her hands began to tremble as she lit the lamps against the premature darkness brought by the storm clouds. Vince noticed immediately. Glory, what's wrong? She shook her head, trying to dispel the panic rising within her. It's nothing, just the storm. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he crossed the room and took her in his arms, holding her close as the thunder rumbled overhead. It's not like before, he murmured against her hair. The house is sound, we're on high ground, the creek's nowhere near flooding. I know, Glory whispered. Logically, I know that, but when I hear the rain, listen to my voice instead, Vince suggested. Focus on what's real right now. You're safe, I'm here with you. Nothing is going to happen to this house or to us tonight. Glory closed her eyes, concentrating on the solid warmth of her husband, on his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. Gradually, her own heart rate slowed, her breathing eased. The memories receded, replaced by the present reality of safety and love. When the worst of her panic had passed, they moved to sit by the fire Vince had built earlier against the evening chill. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within their small home, peace gradually returned. "I'm sorry," Glory said finally. "I thought I was past this." Vince shook his head. "No need to apologize. Some wounds take longer to heal than others." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Besides, I understand. I still can't walk past a sick room without thinking of Sarah and Beth, remembering how quickly the fever took them." Glory leaned her head against his shoulder, grateful beyond words for his understanding. "Do you think it will ever go away completely? The fear?" "I don't know," Vince admitted. "Maybe not entirely, but it gets better, less overwhelming each time." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And it helps having someone who understands, someone to hold on to when the memories come." As the evening progressed, the storm gradually moved eastward, its fury diminishing with distance. By the time they prepared for bed, only a gentle rain remained, pattering soothingly against the roof. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Glory nestled against Vince, finding comfort in his presence. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, his voice already heavy with approaching slumber. "For believing enough for both of us. That day you found me, when I'd lost everything including my faith. You said you'd believe enough for both of us, and you did. You believed in the possibility of a future when all I could see was what was gone." Vince tightened his arm around her. "And now?" Glory considered the question, feeling the weight of her experiences, the devastating loss of her family, the slow, painful process of rebuilding her life, and now the unexpected joy of this new beginning with Vince. "Now I believe too," she said softly. "Not in everything being perfect or protected from harm, but in the strength we find together, in love that survives loss, in beauty that can rise from ruins." Outside, the rain continued its gentle cadence, no longer a threat but a lullaby. Inside, Glory and Vince held each other close. Two survivors who had found in each other not just comfort but courage, the courage to build a new life knowing its fragility. To love deeply, despite having known devastating loss. To have faith not in easy answers but in their shared strength to face whatever might come. As Glory drifted toward sleep, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The flood had taken much from her family, home, innocence, simple faith. But what remained, what she had built from the ruins, was stronger for having been tested, more precious for being hard-won. In Vince's arms, in their new home, in this life they were creating together, Glory had found not just survival but renewal. Not just healing but transformation. Not just belief, but something deeper, a faith tempered by experience, strengthened by love, resilient enough to weather any storm. And that, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.